emerged a peace candidate, thrust into prominence by the shock of the Tet Offensive.
I am a candidate for the nomination of the presidency on the Democratic ticket. I run for that office against an incumbent leader of our party because I believe, as I find many people in this country do believe now and have for the last 5 or 6 months, that we are involved in a very deep crisis of leadership, a crisis of direction, and a crisis of national purpose. And the entire history of this war in Vietnam, no matter what we call it, has been one of continued error and of misjudgment.
Senator Eugene McCarthy nearly beat Johnson in the New Hampshire primary, and the close vote jolted Johnson. At the time, it looked like a vote for peace. In fact, it was a vote against Johnson's conduct of the war. Many New Hampshire voters felt that he wasn't being tough enough. They favored getting out of a war he refused to win. Johnson was further rattled when Robert Kennedy joined the presidential race. The glamorous Kennedys had always worried him. Robert had switched to a peace platform, and Johnson smelled defeat in Wisconsin the next primary. The faraway war was taking its toll at home. Johnson turned to a group of elder statesmen called the Wise Men. They had consistently backed his war policies. He convened them on March 25th. They included establishment figures like former Secretary of State Dean Acheson, former Ambassador to Vietnam Maxwell Taylor, and former National Security Advisor McGeorge Bundy.
And our recommendation, on the whole, not without dissent, disagreement, was that there should not be an increase in force levels in South Vietnam, and that there should be a modification of the policy of bombing North Vietnam.
Now, here was a group saying, Mr. President, stop trying to win the war, start cutting back, don't send any more men, we think you ought to get out. It was a very bitter pill for him.
I think he had himself decided, really, that he would not do the ground force reinforcement. So it was more our gloominess, in a way, than our specific recommendations that he may have found troubling.
To meet price increases in the cost of...
On the afternoon of March 31st, after 2 months of indecision, Johnson rehearsed an address to the nation, scheduled for that evening.
One of those additional expenditures is, so get Clifford and see what figures. This fiscal year, well, you're going to have to get them in the next hour so you can mimeograph it, because George is going to want. In this fiscal year and...
As late as March 28th, his aides were still divided on Vietnam policy.
It was a strong, we will be in there, we will be fighting, they will not drive us out, we will save Vietnam speech. There was a meeting in Secretary Rusk's office. Rusk, Clifford, Bill Bundy, the Assistant Secretary for the Far East, Rostow, and me. Clifford said, the speech is a disaster.
I thought the draft was dreadful. I thought that it was harsh. I thought that it talked about the continuation of the war. It talked about Tet, how Tet could be resolved. There was some suggestion about sending some of the men, not the whole 206,000. To me, it needed much changing and much amendment.
The really surprising thing was that Rusk and Rostow did not fight Clifford on that, but began to speak as if, all right, what do we have to put in line to write a different kind of speech? I went back and wrote a different speech, a very different speech.
As a quick illustration, the first few sentences of that speech in the original draft said, I wish to talk about the war in Vietnam. That was the first sentence. By the time the speech was written and rewritten, we worked days on it before it was given, the first sentence read,
Good evening, my fellow Americans. Tonight I want to speak to you of peace in Vietnam and Southeast Asia.
And that speech was almost a complete reversal of what the speech started out to be.
Tonight, I have ordered our aircraft and our naval vessels to make no attacks on North Vietnam, except in the area north of the demilitarized zone where the continuing enemy buildup directly threatens Allied forward positions and where the movement of their troops and supplies are clearly related to that threat.
I had cut off the peroration, the ending of the speech, which was a kind of McPherson effort to